Hey guys, welcome to the video. My name's Amanda and I'm a second year vet student. And today's video is going to be a part 2 of a video I previously filmed on my channel talking about things I wish I would have known before I started my first year of vet school. So since you guys really liked that video, I thought I would film a part 2 and talk about 5 more things I wish I would have known before I started my first year. So before we start with the tips, as always, if you guys like this video or want to see more videos talking about my vet school journey and me going through the process, please feel free to like this video and subscribe. It means a ton to me, and then you guys can follow along on the journey as I go through vet school. Okay, so jumping right into the tips, my very first thing that I wish I would have known is how to study. So with that being said, I feel like I had a good understanding of how I studied in undergrad, but then when I got into vet school, honestly, my study methods changed so much. I found that depending on the class, the way I studied for it was completely different. Some of my courses were only worth 0.25 credits, whereas other courses were worth 2.5 credits. So obviously the way I studied for the courses that were worth less was different from the way I studied for courses that were worth much more. Also, some of my courses had a much larger practical aspect to them, whereas others were just written communication. So obviously the way I studied for those was different as well. One thing I would encourage you guys to do is to not be afraid to try out different study methods. I took almost the first 3 months of vet school to figure out the study methods and the study habits that worked best for me and made me most successful. And honestly, I went through a ton of different methods before I found 1 or 2 that I really liked and I felt like really helped me understand the material. So just because you think you know how to study in undergrad, don't be surprised if you get to vet school and you have literally no idea how to study. It's just a much different way of presenting content, and you're thrown so much more content than you were in undergrad. So don't be afraid to experiment and try new methods of studying to see what works best for you. Oh, before I get into the studying tip, I am going to make a completely separate video on how I studied in my first year of vet school. I'm going to wait till school starts, that way I can actually get back into using those study habits, but there will be a video coming about the ways I studied for different classes specifically. So stay tuned for that. Okay, I have a little bonus tip for you guys, and that is one thing I wish I would have studied before I even got into vet school. If you are like me and you did not have to memorize the cranial nerves in undergrad, do this right off the bat. It will make your life so much easier. The cranial nerves are talked about in almost all of your classes and come up again and again and again. And having them memorized right off the bat is just going to make your life so much easier. I also have a mnemonic for you that you can use to help you memorize the cranial nerves, and then also if they are sensory or motor nerves. So to memorize the cranial nerves from 1 to 12, use the mnemonic on they traveled, and found Voldemort guarding very ancient Horcruxes. And then to memorize whether the cranial nerves are sensory or motor, you can use the mnemonic, some say marry money, but my brother says big brains matter more. So there's a little side tip for you guys. Memorize those literally now and it'll make your life so much easier. Okay, tip number 2 is something that actually ties into studying, and it's more of a mindset than a way of studying. The mindset that I had when I was studying in vet school was completely different from the mindset I had studying in undergrad. I think I've mentioned it in one of my other videos, but in undergrad, I studied to get the marks I needed to get into vet school. Whereas now that I'm in vet school, I find I study to understand the content and I study to learn and to figure out what I need to know going forward. I was told this really great quote before I started, and I feel like it just stuck in my head and really stayed with me as I was studying throughout the year, and that is to study and learn for your future patients, not for the grades. This quote and this mentality was something that really stuck with me, and I think it's so important to remember because you may be tested in vet school and not get the marks that you got in undergrad, but that grade does not necessarily reflect how well you know the content and how good of a vet you're going to be. Marks do not define how successful you're going to be as a vet. They're literally just numbers on a piece of paper. At the end of the day, whether you finish vet school with a 99 average or an 80 average, you are still going to be a doctor. So I think it's really important to sit yourself down at the beginning of the year and say, no matter what marks I get through the year, the only thing thing that I should really care about is if I am learning this material and I'm understanding this material so that I can apply it in the future. Once I got this mindset drilled into my head and I stopped focusing so much on the marks, I found I was a lot less stressed in vet school, and because I was a lot less stressed, my marks actually improved. But honestly, just enjoy the process and try not to focus too much on marks. Okay, the third tip I have for you is to make a schedule and stick to your schedule. Now, this might be a personal preference, but I am the type of person who loves sticking to a schedule, and my life is very routine and set out. At the beginning of every week, so on Sunday night, I would sit down and I would plan my week out on a digital planner. I would write down all the times I had lectures, when I had labs, when I was going to study. I even wrote down what my extracurriculars were for that week. Having my week laid out in front of me and being able to see the bigger picture of when things were due allowed me to sit down and figure out a study schedule and also just a relaxing schedule. That is another thing that I would definitely recommend doing, is literally schedule time for yourself to relax. In my head, I thought, oh, I'm just gonna relax whenever I have the chance, but vet school is so hectic and your life becomes very hectic that sometimes you forget to take a break and just relax and do something for yourself. So when I had that time blocked off in my calendar, it honestly forced me to relax because I was like, well, it's in the schedule, I have to do what it says. So yes, that is honestly the biggest lifesaver, is planning out your week so that you can see what you have to do, and it just helps you stay on top of your life because, like I said, vet school gets kind of hectic. Okay, the fourth tip that I have for you is to get involved in extracurriculars and your school community. OVC is really great. They have over 28 different clubs that you can join at the beginning of the year, and these clubs offer a wide variety of labs and lunch talks on certain topics that are not necessarily covered in the curriculum. It's a really great way to learn outside of the classroom and figure out where your interests lie in vet med. Also, a lot of these clubs will offer really cool labs that you can go to that allow you to practice your technical skills and your practical skills that you won't necessarily get in the classroom setting. Another benefit of getting involved in your community and in extracurriculars that your school offers is that you get to connect with a wide variety of people. Joining clubs or extracurriculars like the hockey team gives you a really great chance to connect with upper years and build connections that you wouldn't necessarily get if you were just sitting in a classroom setting. Honestly, you never know what certain connections are going to give you in the future, so trying to connect with as many of your classmates and your future colleagues is going to be so important going forward. Okay, and the very last tip that I have for you guys is to use resources outside of the classroom to help with your learning. In vet school, you will be given all the material that you need to learn the concepts in your lecture notes and in textbooks, but honestly, sometimes you need to find supplemental information that will help with your learning, mostly because everybody learns different. So just because the material is going to be presented in one way doesn't mean you can't go out and find ways that the material is presented differently that will help you learn. VIN, the Veterinary Information Network, was a huge helper for me in my first year of vet school. I used it mostly for anatomy because they have a 3D anatomy simulator there where you can pick the species and pick the region of the body that you're focusing on, and you can actually isolate different muscles or nerves to visualize them on a 3D animal. This was super helpful for me because I would go through the dissections and I would understand what I was looking at, but then I would get home and completely forget what I learned. So being able to almost do a 3D dissection online on my own time was super helpful in studying for anatomy. The other thing that is really great is that you can go and look at veterinary forums and ask questions and get responses from vets that are in your community and also around the world. Getting advice and tips from other vets who have been in the profession for many years is super valuable and is something that I never even thought to do. But anytime I had a vet-related question, I would honestly go and just reach out to certain mentors or post on a forum and see what vets who had been in the industry for many years thought about my question. So that is my final tip for you guys. Don't be afraid to go out there and find other resources that are going to benefit you most in your learning. Just because content is going to be presented in a certain way doesn't mean that that is how you have to learn it, especially if you feel like you're not learning it the way it's being presented. Sometimes for me especially, just reading off a lecture slide is not good enough, and I have to go to YouTube and find videos on how the body system systems work, because seeing it visually drawn out is much more informative to me than just reading off a lecture slide. So that is honestly my biggest tip that I have for you, summarizing this entire video, is to cater your experience in vet school to what is going to benefit you most, and don't be afraid to go out there and research and try different things so that you can actually find study methods, extracurriculars, other resources that are going to benefit you and make your experience in vet school the best it possibly can be. So now that I have given you 5 more tips on what you should know before you go into your first year of vet school, I hope you're feeling a little bit more prepared. Honestly, you are never going to walk into first year feeling 100% prepared. That's just not how it works. But I hope with these tips and the tips I gave you in the other video, you can at least feel like you kind of know what you're doing. So with that being said, I hope you guys liked this video. As always, if you have any questions about vet school or the application process, feel free to reach out. I love talking about it, and I will try my best to answer any questions that you might have. And with that, I'm going to end this video and think of 5 more tips that I learned in my first year of vet school to make another video.